We are now going to be switching topics from Adrienne Gear's reading power to writing power. The topic of this chapter is really all about inviting students to question and create inferences. Good readers ask questions while they read, and good stories invite readers to ask questions. So they really go hand in hand. This might look like a reader asking questions while they read, thinking, I wonder, and then creating inferences like maybe. One lesson idea is to introduce writing that invites questions. So remind your students, good readers ask questions while they read. This is a picture exercise, so you could start by showing students a picture. No text involved, and ask, what clues do you think are most important in this picture? Or what are you wondering about this picture? What are you inferring is the feeling of the character or animal or person? What are you inferring is happening? You might invite students to share or compare their inferences with their classmates and explain that good writers leave out details. They don't tell you exactly what happened. They allow you as the reader to fill in the details with your own thinking. This is a quote that I thought was helpful. Leaving room for thinking in your writing can sometimes be more difficult than writing it all down. It's almost like trying to write a story by not writing a story. When writers leave things out, it's an invitation for the reader to step in. So you might ask your students, why do people ask questions? And there really are a variety of reasons that people ask questions. They might be trying to get information, they might be trying to learn about a person. This lends to different types of questions. There are quick questions and deep questions. Oftentimes the quick questions are factual and there's one right answer. And then the deep questions might be more open to interpretation. They might be opinion. Oftentimes there's no right answer, and they're oftentimes more complex and require more thinking. So good writers don't tell you everything. That's another theme that Adrienne Gear highlights. They don't tell you everything. They leave the deep thinking to you. So one idea that is suggested in the book is to read only the first page of an anchor book and then ask your class, what are you wondering? So based on your first impression, what might happen, what is the character like, and so on. This is another example she gives. These forms are all in the book, so if they fit with your lesson, you might want to check those out. First, you could come up with a T-chart, inviting students to create deep questions about big topics like questions about nature or questions about life. And then you could turn those into an illustration activity where students are asking the question and then kind of filling in their own thinking. Another activity that's suggested is about inferring emotions. The activity is called Too Much Information. So it's really about teaching kids to not include every piece of description because that's what good writers do. So rather than telling how a character is feeling, good writers might leave a clue as to how the character is feeling. So the activity that goes along with this, which I thought sounded pretty fun, is to invite one student to step outside really quick and then play an emotion guessing game. So everyone in the class comes up with a certain emotion that they're going to be acting out or going to be displaying. And then when the student comes back in, they are going to describe moments where they might have felt this way. Like, I felt this way when, and then the guesser student has to come up with the emotion in which all of the students are using. From there, you could have all the students choose one of the emotions and expand it into a writing piece describing, but using making sure to avoid too much information. So not telling what a student is feeling, but leaving clues. Another example was called Text Me a Story. It really encourages students to develop their own language through communicating through texting, which allows them to create a dialogue and allows the reader to infer. So you're really cutting back on the amount of language used in order to tell a story using the reader's thinking. Another example that was kind of fun was called Inferring from Little Text. And it highlighted words that could be interpreted differently based on different scenarios. So the really common words like yes, no, okay, dude, hug, oh, and hey. And students would first start by brainstorming situations when they would use these. And then they would write a story with little text, like maybe just this word or a few other words. And then the illustration would kind of help the reader infer what the word meant. So it highlighted words that could mean kind of different things. Inferring a moral, that's another way we can get students to infer. Sometimes the reader tells what the moral is, but more often the student or the writer allows students or their readers to infer what the moral is. So oftentimes books don't end with, and the moral of the story is, but rather they invite students to use their own thinking. So you could brainstorm a list of morals that they've heard of before, read fables, and then students would infer which moral the writer is using. You could, from there, have students pick a specific moral and then review the features of a fable and try it out. Have them try to write their own story using one of the morals in mind the whole time. Another example was inferring from poetry. So one of the highlights was good readers don't give everything away. They invite readers to think. So the activity that was suggested was a personification web. So they choose an inanimate object and they include descriptions or actions, feelings, voice that object might use. And then from there, they write a poem in the first person, kind of pretending that they're the inanimate object, and then don't give it a title. So other readers would then have to infer what object they are being. Inferring an event from poetry. So this one's pretty straightforward. You pretty much read different poems, and there was some anchor texts that were suggested, and ask students what they think the poem is about. These ones, they wouldn't, come right on and say what the event was, obviously. And then another one was inferring from pictures. Using textless books was a suggestion in Writing Power. And together you would read, quote unquote, the book with no words, just pictures. And then students would create a text based on pictures. So first you kind of try out the whole reading a book with no text. And then students could get an illustration and then create the text from there. So these are just some reflection questions in your discussion posts. It could be helpful for you to have a little bit of a guide. Don't feel like you need to answer these, but they might get your thinking started. So how do you use questioning or inferencing for your students to become better readers and writers? And which of these ideas might you use in the future?